She was still cooking bitter greens for the mourners when her brother asked for the spare key to their father's study. He did not lower his voice. He did not wait for the last visitor to leave the compound. He walked past the canopy where people were still wiping their eyes and said, loud enough for half the yard to hear,
Chiedza, where does Baba keep the study key? We need to secure his papers before anything goes missing.
Their aunt nodded from her seat near the gate.
That is wise. We should also list the cars before people start claiming what is not theirs.
By that evening, the eldest sister had already decided the house in Borrowdale would be hers. The younger brother was on the phone discussing the farmland outside Mazwe. An uncle had already removed the old man's wristwatch from the bedside table, saying someone needed to keep it safe. It looked, to anyone watching, as though grief had a closing time, as though love had ended the moment the coffin touched the ground. Only one thing troubled Rutendo Chikara that evening, standing quietly at the edge of a family already dividing a man they had not finished burying. 3 nights before he died, her father had held her hand tighter than he had in months and whispered something she had not understood at the time.
When everyone starts looking in the obvious places, don't stop looking.
She had thought it was the medicine talking. She had thought illness was confusing him. But standing in the middle of a family already arguing over what a man owned before they had properly mourned who he was, those words refused to leave her. Nobody in that family knew their father had left a second document, least of all the people already spending him. This is her story. Rutendo was the middle child, born in Harare, Zimbabwe, in a house her father built himself, brick by brick, over 11 years of Saturday mornings before any of his 3 children were old enough to remember it being built. She was not the loudest in the family, not the richest, not, according to most of her relatives, her father's favorite. They liked to say she was too emotional, too soft, too sentimental, always the one who noticed things nobody else bothered to notice. They called her emotional when she slept in the chair beside her father's hospital bed during his worst nights. They called her emotional when she rearranged her work schedule around his appointments month after month without ever once mentioning it to anyone. They called her emotional when she reminded him gently every single morning to take the tablets the doctor had prescribed, and he pretended to forget, and she pretended to believe, because that small performance had become somewhere along the way the closest thing they had to a joke between them. Every Wednesday morning, for almost 6 years, she woke before the sun and drove across the city before the traffic swallowed the roads to the same woman selling fresh vegetables near Mbari Market to buy the exact greens her father loved. Not because they were expensive, not because they healed anything, because they reminded him of her late mother's cooking, and some mornings that was the only medicine that actually worked. She cooked in his kitchen while he complained every time that she used too much salt. She placed his tablet on the same small wooden tray beside the same window every single day. The blue one first, the white one second, half a yellow tablet after breakfast. Afterwards, they sat together on the veranda, sometimes talking, sometimes only watching the birds move through the msasa tree in the yard, and sometimes saying nothing at all. Because by then, silence between them had become its own kind of conversation. None of those mornings ever appeared on the family group chat. Nobody photographed them. Nobody thanked her for them. But her father always smiled before she left, and for years that smile had been enough. The rest of the family visited differently. Her elder sister, Chiedza, usually arrived wearing perfume and a wide smile, asking whether the paperwork for the Borrowdale house had been renewed or whether the tenants on the second property were still paying on time. There was always a property question, never a medical one. Her younger brother, Tapiwa, rarely stayed longer than half an hour, always somewhere else to be. Yet somehow he always found time whenever the family lawyer came to visit. Her aunt, a formidable woman named Grace, believed she understood the family's finances better than anyone alive, and often reminded her brother that if he had only listened to her advice years earlier, the family would have doubled everything they owned. Her father only smiled at this. He rarely argued with anyone by then. He had grown quieter after his wife passed, the way loneliness sometimes settles into a person, not bitterly, just silently, like a room slowly losing its noise. One afternoon, arranging his tablets, he looked toward the bookcase and said something Rutendo did not fully understand at the time. People think inheritance begins after a person dies. It does not. It begins while a person is still alive. The ones who inherit your heart usually arrive long before the ones who inherit your property. She wanted to ask what he meant. He changed the subject before she could. That happened often in his final year. He spoke in careful pieces, like a man laying stones across a river, hoping someone would eventually notice where the path led. 3 months before he died, he asked her a strange question. If everyone in the family wanted the house, what would you want? She answered before she had time to think about it.
I would want you.
His eyes filled with water. He looked away without saying anything more. She did not know that her answer had mattered. In his final week, the family suddenly became very attentive. Chiedza visited twice. Tapiwa arrived once with imported fruit their father could no longer eat. And Grace stayed overnight and asked more than once where important papers were kept. Her father watched all of it quietly, saying very little. On the morning he died, Rutendo was already on her way to the house when the caregiver called. By the time she arrived at the gate, it was already over. Everything after that moved the way grief always moves, in a blur of visitors, phone calls, prayers, and relatives arriving from places nobody had seen them in years, each one remembering a slightly different version of the man they were burying. Then came the burial, then came the food, then came the estate. Less than an hour after the last mourners had gone, and Grace cleared her father's study table and spread papers across it.
We should avoid confusion. Your father already had a will. The lawyer read it 6 months ago.
Tapiwa nodded quickly.
Exactly. No need for unnecessary questions.
Rutendo looked around the room. Her father's chair was still facing the window. His reading glasses still sat beside an unfinished crossword. His old fountain pen lay exactly where he had left it. Everything in that room felt like him. Only the people standing inside it had changed. Chiedza opened a notebook and began listing everything. The houses, the farmland, the transport company shares, the rental properties, even the old fishing boat their father had not used in years. Nobody in the room asked what their father had actually wanted, only what each of them expected to receive. When it was Rutendo's turn, Aunt Grace offered her a tired, patient smile. "You don't need to worry," she said. "We all know how much time you spent caring for him, but property should not become payment for kindness." The room went quiet. Rutendo simply looked at her. "Don't let emotion make you suspicious of your own family," her aunt continued gently. "We already have the official will," Tapiwa added. "Please don't create problems where there aren't," said Chiedza. Rutendo looked toward the bookcase, toward the photograph of her parents smiling on their wedding day, and her father's final words returned to her, clearer than before. When everyone starts looking in the obvious places, don't stop looking. For the first time, she wondered if he had not been speaking about grief at all. She wondered if he had been speaking about the truth. She did not sleep that night. It was not only grief keeping her awake. That pain had already settled into her chest like a stone she had learned to carry. It was his words circling again and again. He had not sounded confused when he said them. He had sounded certain. Yet everyone around her behaved as though the story had already ended, as though the will read months earlier dividing the visible estate neatly between the children and setting aside a monthly allowance for her aunt was the whole and final truth. So why had he spoken to her that way, 3 nights before the end? The next morning, she returned to the house, not to search, just to sit where he used to sit. The caregiver, a patient woman named Ruvimbo, who had worked for the family nearly 4 years, was sweeping the veranda.
You came early. I couldn't stay away.
The older woman smiled sadly.
Your father knew you would come.
As they watered the flowers together, Ruvimbo hesitated, then spoke. There is something I have wanted to tell you.
About 2 weeks before he passed, your father asked me to bring him the small brass key, the one he kept hidden inside his Bible. I've never seen that key.
He said no one must know.
He locked something inside his study, then gave the key back to me for safekeeping. He said, people only search where they expect to find something.
Rutendo stood very still. Those words were too close to what her father had told her from his hospital bed. Too deliberate to be an accident. She spent the next 2 hours searching the study carefully. The drawers held nothing unusual. The filing cabinet held nothing unusual. The small safe held only copies of documents the whole family already knew about. Everything looked exactly as it should, which, she was beginning to understand, was precisely the problem. She sat down in her father's chair, closed her eyes, and let the silence settle around her. Then she noticed the grandfather clock in the corner. It had stopped. The hand sat frozen at exactly 9:15. Her father had wound that clock himself every single Sunday afternoon for as long as she could remember. He never forgot. She walked over and reached inside to restart the pendulum. Her fingers brushed against something that should not have been there. A piece of paper folded carefully behind the wooden panel. She pulled it free. It was not a legal document. It was a single handwritten sentence in her father's careful hand. The first lock protects the second. No signature, no explanation. Just her father still speaking to her in riddles, even now. That evening, she visited her father's longtime lawyer, a calm, careful man named Mr. Moyo, who had known the family for over 30 years. When she asked him gently whether her father had ever mentioned another document, something shifted in his expression. Only for a moment, but she saw it. No, he said. Are you certain? He folded his hands. Rutendo, why are you asking? She told him everything. Her father's final words, the brass key, the note behind the clock. He listened without interrupting, then looked out the window for a long moment before speaking again. 8 months ago, your father asked me something unusual, he said. He asked whether a person could leave instructions that would only take effect if certain conditions were met. What did you tell him? I explained the law, and then he smiled and thanked me and left. He never brought a formal document to this office. That answer felt truthful and also incomplete. As she stood to leave, Mr. Moyo added one more thing. Your father was one of the most careful men I have ever known. If he wanted something hidden, he would never hide it where a lawyer would think to look. Outside, rain had begun to fall over the city. For the first time since her father's death, Rutendo felt afraid, not of losing property, but of discovering exactly who her family really was underneath their grief. Meanwhile, the estate meetings grew more urgent. Chiedza had already contacted an agent about selling the Borrowdale house. Tapiwa wanted to use the farmland as collateral for a business loan. And Grace insisted the family home itself should be sold. It is far too large for one family to keep. What exactly are we preserving it for? Baba lived in that house for over 40 years, Rutendo said quietly. Her aunt sighed. The dead do not need houses. Nobody in the room challenged her, not even Tapiwa. That silence hurt Rutendo more than the sentence itself. A few days later, she visited her father's oldest friend, a retired transport businessman everyone called Sekuru Dumisani, who had built his first company alongside her father before life carried them in different directions. He welcomed her with tears in his eyes. Your father spoke about you often, he said. I miss him, she replied. They drank tea together, and for a moment he laughed, remembering how her father used to complain that she nagged him about his medicine. Then his smile faded. He rose slowly, walked to a long wooden cabinet, and returned holding a sealed brown envelope. "This belongs to you," he said. "My father left this with you?" "Almost a year ago. He said I was only to give it to you if the rest of the family became more interested in his property than in his memory." Written across the front in her father's familiar handwriting were 8 words. "For Rutendo. Open only after they believe they have won." She held the envelope against her chest, and for the first time since her father's death, she allowed herself to believe her father had left behind more than grief and confusion. Whatever truth he had protected, one thing was certain. The family believed the story was already finished. Her father's final chapter had only just begun. Rutendo did not open the envelope in the car. She drove back to the house, walked into her father's study, and closed the door behind her. She set the envelope on the desk where her father had signed a lifetime of documents, and for several minutes she simply looked at it, reading the same 8 words again and again. Outside, she could hear relatives discussing the value of the Borrowdale house as though it were already sold. She broke the seal carefully. Inside were 3 things: a handwritten letter, a small brass key, and a folded card bearing one instruction. "Take this key to Mr. Moyo. He already knows the lock." Her hands trembled as she unfolded the letter. The first line brought tears to her eyes immediately. "My dear Rutendo, if you are reading this, it means my greatest fear came true. I prayed I was wrong about the rest of the family. I prayed grief would bring them together instead of pulling them apart. But if they began dividing my life before they finished honoring it, then I was right to prepare what I am about to give you." She kept reading. "You never once asked me for land or money. Every Wednesday you came with vegetables, even when I told you not to bother. You sat beside me when silence became my only companion. Wealth should never reward noise, it should protect character." For the first time since her father's death, Rutendo cried without holding anything back. The next morning, she brought the brass key to Mr. Moyo's office. When she placed it on his desk, the lawyer went completely still. "So," he said quietly, "so he trusted you." He walked to a steel cabinet in the corner and removed a small, unlabeled black case with a single keyhole. The brass key fit perfectly. Inside lay a sealed legal document signed by her father and witnessed by 3 people, properly registered months before his death. For nearly 20 minutes, only the sound of turning pages filled the room. When Mr. Moyo finished reading, he removed his glasses slowly. He did not replace the first will, he said. He completed it. The first will divided the visible property, the houses, the vehicles, the accounts everyone already expected. The second document controlled everything that gave those properties their actual value. The holding company that managed the family's land, the original title deeds to the farm, the voting shares in the transport business, the investment accounts that kept every property running. Without those, the first inheritance was little more than expensive buildings carrying expensive responsibilities. Her father had separated ownership from control. And then came the final clause, which Mr. Moyo read aloud in a voice that had gone unexpectedly soft. "These controlling assets shall remain under the stewardship of my daughter Rutendo, because she has already demonstrated the character required to preserve them. She is instructed to protect this family's future, not its pride." Rutendo closed her eyes. She had never wanted power. Her father had trusted her with responsibility instead. 3 days later, the family gathered again, this time inside the lawyer's conference room. Chiedza arrived with property valuation papers, Tapiwa carried a folder of business proposals, and Grace wore a confident smile. Mr. Moyo cleared his throat. "There is a second registered document." Silence dropped over the room. Chiedza frowned. "A second what?" "A supplementary estate instrument." Tapiwa laughed, certain it was a mistake. "That's impossible." The lawyer calmly began reading, and as he did, the room slowly changed. confidence collapsing into disbelief, disbelief collapsing into incredulity. And Grace interrupted twice, insisting it could not be legitimate, until Mr. Moyo confirmed gently but firmly that everything had already been verified. Chiedza stood. The Borrowdale house remains yours, the lawyer said, but ownership of the company holding its title now belongs to Rutendo. Tapiwa's voice shook. The farmland? You inherited the farming rights. The original title and the development company belong to Rutendo. And the transport company? Managed through the holding corporation, which also belongs to your father, under his written instruction. Nobody spoke for almost a full minute. Then came the accusations, sharp and immediate. You manipulated him. You turned him against us. You planned this all along. Rutendo stayed seated. She remembered something her father had told her once, quietly on the veranda. Truth does not become louder because people shout at it. So she answered calmly, I didn't know. I found out 3 days ago. She reached into her bag, removed her father's letter, and handed it to Mr. Moyo without another word. He read the final paragraph aloud, the one every person in that room needed to hear. Children who compete for property while their father's chair is still warm have mistaken inheritance for reward. Inheritance is responsibility. Responsibility belongs to the one who has already carried it. Nobody interrupted. Nobody could. In the weeks that followed, the family's hurried plans quietly potted apart, one after another, not because Rutendo blocked them, but because the truth had simply caught up to everyone at once. The property sales stalled, the loan application collapsed once the bank realized the land could not legally be pledged. Investors withdrew from conversations that no longer made sense.
Weeks later, Chiedza came to see her alone. She looked tired, older somehow, in the particular way people look when they have finally stopped arguing with something true. I've been angry, she admitted. I kept asking myself why Baba chose you. Her eyes drifted toward the old medicine tree, still sitting exactly where Rutendo had left it. I think I finally understand. Neither sister cried, neither argued. They simply sat together for the first time in years. Tapiwa visited the week after that. He did not ask about money. He asked instead, what would Baba have wanted us to do? Rutendo answered gently, start acting like family. That single conversation changed something between them. Not overnight. Healing rarely arrives that quickly. But slowly, honestly, the way real change usually does. The family home was never sold. Rutendo restored it exactly as her father had loved it. His study became a small library where every grandchild in the family could sit and read after school. The transport business began funding scholarships for young engineering and agriculture students. The rental income from the estate paid for every grandchild's education. Even Aunt Grace's monthly allowance continued exactly as her father had arranged. Rutendo changed almost nothing about the estate her father had built. She only changed the hearts standing around it. One Wednesday morning, months later, she stood in his kitchen preparing his favorite vegetables the same way she always had, the same recipe, the same wooden spoon, the same quiet rhythm of a ritual nobody had ever asked her to keep but her. When it was ready, she carried a small bowl into his study and placed it beside his framed photograph. Then she laid both documents side by side on his old desk, the first and the second, and said quietly, "Thank you, Baba." The room stayed silent, but somehow it no longer felt empty. Some people leave houses behind. Some leave money. A few leave something far rarer, the kind of wisdom that protects the generations who come after them. Her father had left all three, and in doing so, he proved something many families only learn far too late. Grief shows you who truly loved the person. Money shows you who was only ever waiting for the room to empty. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who still believes that character is the greatest inheritance a family can ever receive.